Hey guys, it's Troy again with another pen video. Yeah, I know it's been a while. So between a hectic work schedule, family, and just life in general, and having kids here at home 24 hours a day, it's a little loud here. So I'm finally getting to record, but you know what? It's like 4 o'clock in the morning. Anyway, when you start to think about iconic pens, iconic vintage pens, one of the first pens that you're going to be steered towards when you talk to collectors is maybe a Parker 51 would be something you want to add to your collection. A fantastic American pen from, let's say, the 1940s up through the 60s or so. And what you're starting to see now is a revival of a lot of those old iconic brands. Esterbrook is one big example that comes to mind. And also you'll see some different models that come around again. Well, the Parker 51 is one of those that has had one revival for a very brief amount of time with one particular model that I saw in doing some history. But now the Parker 51 has been re-released, and I have mine, and I've been using it for quite a while. Well, I say quite a while. I mean, since I got it, I've been using it incessantly. So, got a real good feel for it. Parker 51s are also some pens that I have in my collection. We have at least 3 of them in the house. Actually, 5 if you count the desk set that I've got. So I'm going to show you those. I'm going to do something that maybe some other video presenters aren't going to do for you, and that show you some of the old and some of what I like, what I don't like about the new one, okay? So let's start with what I've got here, and I'm going to, believe it or not, I'm going to show you a fake Parker 51 as well. Alright, so I've got in front of me right now 3 Parker 51s and a fake Parker 51. And that fake is going to be really prominent. You're going to see a lot of them out there. As a matter of fact, I got a bunch of them sitting around the house. Matthew has some in his collection. I think my wife has at least one. I retain one in my collection, and I've got a bag full of them just for giveaway. But that's going to be this one right here. This actually is not a Parker. It's a Hero, a Chinese-made knockoff. When you have an iconic pen that sold really well, and it's something that's highly sought after by collectors, and they were really plentiful, then you're going to have a lot of knockoffs. As a matter of fact, the Parker 51 inspired a lot of other pen makers to try to catch up to what they were doing. And they had an influence on makers like Waterman and Esterbrook. So looking at this one here, this basically is a really cheap, horrible knockoff of the Parker 51. It's a Hero 616. You can see that you've got the tapered hooded nib. And this one happens to be an aerometric filler, which is something that was popular with the Parker 51. And I have one sitting right here. That's an aerometric filler, and the real deal. This particular pen, it's horrible, it's scratchy, they came in a variety of colors, they're cheap, and that's why a lot of people have them, because they're just cheap garbage from China. As a matter of fact, that's the very thing that when the Parker 51 was being hyped as being a return item, that a lot of people were concerned, is it going to be just cheap Chinese-made assembly line garbage? I can tell you right now, no. That's the good news. So, taking a look at the real Parker 51s. This is the one that just arrived a little while ago that is now in my collection. I got the teal version in a medium nib. I didn't necessarily want teal, but that's what happened to be available still with a medium nib when I went to go order. I had to pre-order mine, and I pre-ordered it months ago, and it finally showed up. As a matter of fact, I'm going to show you here, I ordered mine from Farney's. Their latest catalog just came out, and I got mine in the mail. My little pen porn magazine showed up, and I ordered mine from Farney's because they were an American distributor. They had them at least available for pre-order, and I've used them before, happily so. So I decided to go ahead and use them for this particular purchase. To give you an idea on the inside of their catalog, yes, they sent me another one when this one arrived. you can see right here what the pricing was. Looking down here, the deluxe ball pen was going for $200. The deluxe fountain pen, $310. Although special priced $248. That's with a gold nib. All right. So you look here, the Parker CT fountain pen, $109, and then the CT ball pen. Well, the CT essentially, it's a steel nib for the CT version on the fountain pen, and that's what I ordered, and I'll explain why here in just a little bit. All right, so let's look at the some of the older versions. If you want some history on the Parker 51, I'm going to put two different websites for you to go look at. ParkerPens.net is always a good resource, and then Parker51.com are two decent resources for the Parker 51, or actually Parker pens in general. This one here belongs to my son Matthew. He managed to get it given to him. I guess when you're cute walking around a pen show and you're doing a scavenger hunt put on by the Pen Collectors of America, and you run across one table and he's looking for Parker 51s, and a guy pulls one out, hands it to him, says, "Here, you can have it." So the advantages of being, young and cute, as opposed to old and ugly like me. So he was actually given this particular Parker 51. They typically came with the metal cap, and they often had the Parker arrow just like you see here as a clip. You can see it's jeweled there, and it's just, this particular one is just rounded. I can't take all the time to go through the history of the evolution of the Parker 51, but this came out as an aerometric filler. Again, like I showed you with a cheap knockoff, you can see that you've got a tapered barrel that comes down to a hooded nib. The hooded nib was kind of a revolutionary thing that really wasn't around much, and it really inspired a lot of different manufacturers to kind of catch up to what Parker was doing with it. You can see it's got the little squeeze bulb here, like the other one did, but this particular one I'm not going to squeeze for you because it is inked up and I don't feel like cleaning up ink. So let's go ahead and close that, and it is a slip top. Then we're going to look at mine. Mine is again black and silver, and they came in a variety of colors, and it's this is one that I had actually ordered off from eBay, and I went ahead and had it refurbished by Antique Digger, antiquedigger.com. Use discount code TROY for 10% off all your purchases there. So this particular one you can see is just a little different in its length. Girth is fairly similar, but maybe just a little bit bigger on this one, and this is an earlier model than Matthew's pen here. Very similar on the cap, slip cap once again, and you can tell that you've got that nice tapered hooded nib. What's different about this though is it is a vac filler. If you're familiar with Parker vacuumatics, like you would see here, very recognizable. Well, it's the same idea. It's a vac filler, and that's one of the reasons I had someone else restore it rather than me mess it up. So let's take a look over at the modern Incarnation, and you can see a few differences. Number one, you can see the difference in the clip compared to what I was used to seeing. So bring these up. So the old iconic Parker 51 clip, the clip is a little different. You look at the top, you can see that you've got more of a colored jewel here, and in here is just a little tiny dome. You can see the band is wider. This band actually does say Parker on it. Now, for those of you who were worried that it was going to be just cheap Chinese-made garbage, actually was made in France, was not made in China. And the reason for that is Parker is now owned by Newell Rubbermaid. Yes, the plasticware manufacturer, Rubbermaid. Well, guess who else is made by Rubbermaid, to use their phrase? Waterman. Waterman pens are also owned by Newell Rubbermaid, and Waterman is made in France. So you've got a pen manufacturing facility owned by Rubbermaid or Newell, and you've already got it over in France. So great, they'll manufacture their nicer and ostensibly nicer pens there as well. And it even says right here that it was made in France. This one, as opposed to being a slip cap, is a screw cap. You can see you've got some threads right there, so it doesn't slip. This one screws on, and you can see the band is a little different here because it's not a slip cap. You don't have that catch there for a slip cap, but you still have the same tapered barrel down to a hooded nib. This one is a cartridge converter pen. Now, the original Parker 51 actually ended up making a cartridge converter style when they evolved into the early 1960s. But this one is the only way it was offered. I did not elect to use the cartridge that it came with. It did not come with a cartridge. It only with a converter. It only came with a cartridge. I elected to use a converter that I happen to have laying around here in the house rather than use that particular cartridge. So when it arrives, how does it arrive? Well, it shows up in a box just like this. You can see that it's teal medium, TEA-M, Parker 51 teal medium. Nothing special, but you do have Newell Europe, parkerpen.com, distributed here in America from Newell Office Brands out of Atlanta, Georgia. So you open it up, and it came in a presentation box like this. And you can see that Farney's put their sticker on the bottom of it. Nothing special, nothing fancy, and it is a box. I'd say generic. Obviously, it is not generic in that it's Parker, but it's not. Doesn't say right on it Parker 51 on the box itself. Okay, so you open it up, and you would have the pillow right here where the Parker 51 would sit when it came. You lift up, and it does include an ink cartridge. Like I said, I elected not to use that particular ink cartridge. So there you go. There is the Parker 51 compared to two other vintage Parker 51s. And you can see slight differences, but it is a re-release. One of the things I was hoping about with the re-release, that it would be better than the re-release, let's say like the Esterbrook Phaeton. That's one of those that I went ahead and bit on when Esterbrook. I haven't done their Esty yet. It's totally different from the old vintage Esterbrook's. But the Esterbrook Phaeton was one that they had re-released. So I was kind of curious about it and when I got it. This one was actually a disappointment to me. So when you're going to re-release an iconic brand, now the Phaeton was not one of their biggest, but it was something that interested me, being a re-release of a vintage pen in a modern version. I was a little disappointed with this. The price point on this, however, at about $60, $65 was much more attractive, I felt, than the $109 version. So, let me explain to you why I ordered the steel nib. Your choices, were going to be the steel or the gold nib. Well, a steel nib, $109. Gold nib, $258. To me, that was a no-brainer. I saw absolutely zero benefit in going for a gold nib other than for the ability to claim I got one with a gold nib. When you're dealing with modern steel nibs, you can often get a really good, solid writing pen. In addition to that, when you are dealing with a nib that is going to be a hooded nib, do not expect a whole lot of flex or response from it. They are typically going to be fairly rigid. this I know just from experience with all the pens that I've got that have hooded nibs, that it's going to be a fairly rigid nib. I don't mind rigid nibs. Actually, I like rigid nibs and often prefer them over flexi nibs. All that being said, I saw zero benefit to me personally in ordering the gold nib. I thought that the steel nib would be just fine. And you know what? I was not disappointed. It wrote very well, or does write very well. And I will show you that here after I show you some statistics on the Parker 51 re-release. Alright, now that you've seen all the statistics you could possibly want to see on the new Parker 51, let me show you how it responds and how it writes as opposed to the vintage models. My son's vintage model is probably the least of the three in terms of how it writes. It's got a very fine nib to it. And sometimes with a Parker 51, you need to apply a little more pressure in order to get a good flow. I'm using a Clairefontaine pad. Quite honestly, on a Rhodia pad, when I was attempting to write with the Parker 51 new model, didn't like Rhodia quite as well. This Clairefontaine is a little different, just slightly different in how this particular pad feels. I'm going to see how well it does. I will say that the modern Parker 51 that I've got actually writes very well on regular old note paper, copy paper, that kind of stuff that you would use at work. It's going to bleed like a fountain pen does, but at least it writes very well on it. So let's go ahead and put pen to paper on my son's Parker 51, and let's see how it works compared to the others. This is probably from the late 1940s. It is a fine nib, and it is an aerometric filler. I put into this one some Waterman Intense Black. I will say on his particular pen, this one is not the smoothest. It writes okay, and it often has hard starts on it. It probably needs some good maintenance, because when he got it, we don't know if it had ever been cleaned. It had the original sack still on it. I probably could tear it apart, flush it out really, really well, and go ahead and put on a new sack for it, but the sack was still pliable, so we just went ahead and used it. And this is not, after 60, 70 years or so, is probably not the most reliable of pens, but it's still decent. It's still a Parker 51. It's still usable, but definitely is not one that I would pick up and go use. This one is the one that I had restored. So this one is my Parker 51 Vac Vintage. And I think it was starting to skip on me last night when I was writing a letter with it, because I'm starting to run out of ink. So if it starts to skip on me here, it's because I'm running really, really low on ink on this one. Yes, it is filled, and yes, it is filled with a Waterman Mystery Blue. Or is it Mysterious Blue? I'm really not sure. But this one has more of a medium nib to it, and you can see the difference between how this one writes and how that one writes. Okay, so that's vintage. You probably wanted to know how the modern version would write, but I wanted to compare for you because, like I said, not many others are going to do so. You pull it apart, you go to and you go to post it. It posts very well. I got to be honest. I tried writing with it its not being posted. It's a little bit of lint on it. I tried to write it with it not being posted, and though I can do it, I prefer this one to be posted. It just fits a little better in my hand, and it's not incredibly back weighted. As a matter of fact, where it sits versus in the web of my hand versus the grip here, it actually does fairly well, just like this. And it's very comfortable to write with. Like I said, I used it writing a letter just last night before going to bed, and I was kind of happy with it. So the Parker, like I said, it didn't do great on the Rhodia. Parker 51, and this is the modern version. It is a very smooth nib, which is one of the reasons why I did not go with a gold, knowing that if I had a good steel nib to it, it was going to be and if it was a smooth writer, then I'd do just fine with it. Here's what I'm going to do though. This does, like I said, is not a big fan. This pen doesn't go great on Rhodia, or in this Clairefontaine, it does a little better on this particular Clairefontaine than it did on the Rhodia paper. And so I'm going to show it to you again, but I'm going to use normal notebook paper. I knew I was probably going to have to do that because of just my experience with this particular pen and how it wrote. It just didn't seem to like, believe it or not, higher end paper. And that's not all that unusual. All right, what I've done here is I've gotten an ordinary notepad. And I use these a lot at work. I use ordinary copy paper at work an awful lot. And yes, I use my fountain pens on them. I don't enjoy spending out of my own pocket just for a particular kind of quality paper at work, but just an ordinary, everyday office pad. Okay. So let's show you here how it writes. And quite honestly, my experience thus far has been that this particular Parker 51, the modern version, now you can tell there's some bleeding on it, okay, like you normally would expect. However, it actually writes very well. If you don't mind the fact that you're going to get a little bit of bleed, and yes, you're going to hear the feedback because of the type of paper, but believe it or not, this actually writes well, and it writes fairly smoothly even on ordinary paper, which, you know, was what actually, believe it or not, I used this to write the letter last night because I knew I was going to be writing with this particular pen. So you know, you can get, you press down a little bit, you're going to get a little bit more of a line variety with it, just as you would any Parker 51, and typically, like I said, a rigid nib, but don't expect flex, but you can get increased ink flow if you press down just a little bit. I don't advise pressing hard, but you can actually still get a little bit of ink flow, because even with a steel nib, you're going to have a little bit of flex. I mean, when I say flex, I'm not talking like a wet noodle. I'm talking just a little bit of bend to get a little bit more ink. So, all right, what do I like about it? I like the way the pen fits in the hand. I like the design. I like the fact that it was fairly quality made, and it was made in France as opposed to the questionable quality that you may get out of some Chinese manufacturers. Don't get me wrong, there are actually some Chinese manufacturers that make some decent quality pens, but as opposed to this garbage here, might as well just chuck those. I like that it's I was dubious whenever I see you know, a modern incarnation of a vintage pen. Like I showed you with that Phaeton. Kind of a disappointment to me. It is a quality pen for $109. Be honest with you, this is probably more like a $60 to $75 pen in my estimation, rather than $109. Nonetheless, for $109, you get a really good writer. You get a Parker pen, a well-known brand name, albeit, you know, under Newell Rubbermaid. but still a decent quality pen. I like the way it fits. I like in my hand. I like the way it posts. I like the way it writes. So in all that, I have no complaints. Like I said, I think price point, they could have probably come down a little bit on the price. I can understand capitalizing on your name and trying to make a profit. I get it. Yeah, but maybe just a hair overpriced at $109, but not outrageous. To me, outrageous was the $250 asking price for a gold nib on it. There's no way I'm going to pay that for a rigid nib on a pen. That's just my personal opinion. You may disagree, and I don't care if you disagree. Everybody's a critic. But anyway, it's a decent pen. It's got a little bit of heft to it. It actually weighs more than the vintage versions, but then again, keep in mind too, you got a good size cap. The cap is actually where some of the weight is, but also here's the other thing: at $109 or $250, you ought to at least include a converter. That's my big beef with a lot of manufacturers, not just this particular manufacturer. I get it. I understand why they do it the way they do. My other complaint is, though, and it has nothing to do with the pen itself, it's just that because of the demand for it, when I went to go pre-order, I had a limited selection as to what nib and color combination I could get. That's no fault of Parker, but it's just because they were in demand, and by the time I went to go pre-order it, I didn't have the color that I first wanted available to me in the nib that I wanted. So I had to settle for teal, which actually turned out to be halfway decent. I can't complain too much about the teal, but it was not my first choice. But still a decent looking pen, and I can tolerate that color really well. It actually looks better than I thought it would. So there you go, the Parker 51, the modern incarnation thereof. I've had this for a while. I've used it quite a bit since I got it and been writing with it an awful lot. So something worthy of consideration, and some of the old Parker 51s that are out there are worth adding to your collection as well. There's been some criticism about getting one of these, that if you're going to spend $109, you might as well go ahead and see about getting a vintage one, because they are out there and they are still plentiful, and they were very well sought after in their day and still are today. That's kind of a fairly true statement. I do recommend adding a vintage Parker 51 to your collection. I really like my vacuumatic version quite a bit, especially since it's been well restored and writes extremely well. But I would put this as something that's a reasonable expectation that you would get a good quality pen at that price point, and that you would actually end up with a good working usable pen in your collection if you went with the modern Parker 51.